I stopped talking on a Tuesday, not dramatically, not with an announcement, I just stopped. And here's the thing that still keeps me awake some nights. No one noticed. Not my daughter Claire, not my son-in-law Derek, not even my 7-year-old granddaughter Emma, who used to crawl into my lap every afternoon asking, "Grandma, tell me a story." For 6 weeks, I lived in their house, cooked their meals, folded their laundry, and didn't say a single unnecessary word. I answered direct questions with nods or one-word responses. I stopped offering opinions, stopped asking about their days, stopped filling the silence that stretched between us like an ocean neither of them cared to cross. 6 weeks of silence, and they didn't notice a thing. Subscribe if this story finds you and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because what happened after I stopped talking changed everything. And I mean everything, but I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. This isn't a story about revenge. This isn't about getting even or making people pay. This is about the moment you realize that your voice, your presence, your entire existence has become so background, so ambient that you could disappear entirely and the only thing people would miss is the service you provided. This is about what happens when you stop performing, when you stop trying, when you stop believing that love means making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. This is about the day I decided I was done. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I ended up in my daughter's guest room at 64 years old, sleeping under a quilt I made myself when Claire was still in high school, back when she used to look at me like I hung the moon instead of like I was a problem she was too busy to solve. My husband Richard died 18 months ago. Heart attack, sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to say goodbye, or "I love you," or "please don't leave me alone." One minute he was reading the newspaper at breakfast, complaining about the price of eggs. The next minute he was on the floor and I was screaming into the phone while the 911 dispatcher told me to stay calm, Mom. Help is on the way, but help didn't come in time. I remember the sound the paramedics made when they came through the door. Heavy boots on hardwood, the crackle of their radios, the way they moved Richard's coffee mug to the side, still half full, steam rising like everything was normal. Like my husband wasn't dying on our kitchen floor. They worked on him for 23 minutes. I counted every second. I stood in the doorway in my bathrobe and slippers, watching strangers compress my husband's chest, watching them shock his heart with paddles that made his whole body jerk like a puppet on strings. When they finally stopped, when the lead paramedic looked at me with those tired, sorry eyes, I knew before he said a word. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry. We did everything we could." We did everything they could, as if that phrase could hold the weight of 42 years of marriage, of shared mortgage payments and inside jokes, and the way Richard used to hum while he cooked Sunday breakfast. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped arriving and the sympathy cards stopped filling the mailbox, I was alone in our house for the first time in 42 years. The silence was unbearable. Every room echoed with Richard's absence. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand, folded carefully next to the detective novel he'd never finish. His jacket still hung by the door, and sometimes I'd press my face into it just to smell him. Old spice deodorant, and the faint scent of the woodshop in the garage where he'd spend Saturday afternoons building birdhouses. The house felt too big, too empty. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like his footsteps. Every time the furnace kicked on, I thought I heard his voice calling from the other room. I couldn't breathe in that house. Claire called every few days at first. Brief calls, always rushed. How are you doing, Mom? Are you okay? I'm sorry, I have to run. Derek's calling me. We'll talk soon. I try to keep her on the line. I'd tell her about the leak in the bathroom sink, about the squirrels getting into the attic, about how I'd found Richard's old tackle box in the garage and cried for an hour holding a plastic worm he'd probably bought 20 years ago. But she was always in a hurry, always had somewhere to be, someone more important to talk to. Then the calls became weekly, then every other week. Then I stopped counting because it hurt too much to keep track of how little I mattered. I sold the house. I know that sounds drastic, but I couldn't afford it anymore on Richard's small pension and my even smaller Social Security check. The mortgage wasn't huge. $87,000 left on a house we'd bought for $120,000 back in 1987. But the property taxes had tripled over the years, and the roof needed replacing, and the furnace made sounds like a dying animal every time winter came around. The plumber said the pipes were old, probably original to the house. The electrician said the wiring was a fire hazard. It would cost $40,000 just to make the place safe, let alone comfortable. I didn't have $40,000. I barely had $4,000 in savings after the funeral expenses, so I sold it. The realtor was a young woman named Stephanie who wore too much perfume and smiled with all her teeth. She walked through every room with her tablet, taking notes, making little humming sounds that I couldn't interpret. "It needs work," she said finally, standing in my kitchen where Richard had collapsed. "But the bones are good. We can list it at $250,000 and see what happens." It sold in 3 days. A young couple with a baby offered $240,000 cash, no inspection, close in 2 weeks. Stephanie called it a blessing. I called it the end of everything I knew. After paying off the remaining mortgage and the realtor fees and the lawyer who handled the paperwork, I cleared $186,000. It felt like a fortune. It felt like blood money. It felt like I'd sold 42 years of memories for a number in a bank account. But I was practical. I always had been. Richard used to joke that I could stretch a dollar until it screamed, so I put most of it in a high-yield savings account. Safe, secure, untouchable. I kept $30,000 accessible for emergencies and living expenses. I figured it would last me a year, maybe more if I was careful, while I found a small apartment and figured out what a life without Richard looked like. That's when Claire called. "Mom, I heard you sold the house. Where are you going to live?" I told her I was looking at apartments. Small, affordable, something with a patio where I could grow tomatoes maybe, something near a bus line so I wouldn't have to drive everywhere. Richard had always done most of the driving and I wasn't confident behind the wheel anymore. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You're not living alone in some apartment. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency?" I started to say I'd be fine, that I was 63 years old, not 93, that I'd managed a household and raised a child and held down a part-time job for decades without supervision. But she cut me off. "Derek and I talked about it. You should come stay with us. We have that guest room. Emma would love having you around more. It just makes sense." It made sense. That's what she said. Like I was a piece of furniture they could fit into their floor plan. Like I was a problem with a practical solution. But I was tired, God, I was so tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of eating dinner by myself in front of the TV. Tired of waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for Richard and finding empty sheets. And the idea of being near my granddaughter, of maybe feeling like part of a family again, it was too tempting to refuse. So I said yes. I moved in 3 weeks later, 2 suitcases, 3 boxes, and a houseplant Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary. A peace lily, because he said it reminded him of me. Hardy, quiet, blooming even in low light. The guest room was small, cream-coloured walls, a double bed with a floral comforter that smelled like detergent and fabric softener, a dresser with a missing drawer pull, and a window that looked out at their neighbour's fence. 8 feet of pressure-treated wood painted grey. That's what I woke up to every morning. But it was mine, or at least I tried to make it mine. I hung a few photos on the wall. Richard and me at Niagara Falls on our honeymoon. Claire as a baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket. Emma at her first birthday party. Chocolate cake smeared across her face. I arranged my clothes in the dresser, my shoes lined up neatly in the closet. I set the peace lily on the windowsill where it could get indirect light. I tried to make it home, but it never felt like home. It felt like a waiting room, a temporary space where I was expected to sit quietly until real life resumed. Only real life never resumed. The first week was fine. Claire worked from home most days, managing social media for some tech startup that paid her more than Richard and I ever made combined. She had a home office upstairs with 2 monitors and a fancy ergonomic chair and a door that stayed closed most of the day. Derek was a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. He travelled a lot, which meant he was gone 3 or 4 days a week. When he was home, he was usually on his phone or his laptop, answering emails at all hours, taking calls in the garage where he thought no one could hear him getting frustrated with his sales team. Emma was in 2nd grade. She had Richard's eyes, that same warm brown with flecks of gold when the light hit them right. That used to make me cry when I looked at her, but I learned to hide it, to swallow it, down with my morning coffee and pretend I was fine. I tried to help. I really did. I cooked dinners, big ones, the kind Richard used to love. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, chicken and dumplings, meatloaf with brown sugar glaze. I'd spend 3 hours in the kitchen chopping and stirring and tasting, making sure everything was perfect. I'd set the table with real plates, not paper. I'd pour drinks, ice water for Emma, sweet tea for Claire, beer for Derek if he was home. I'd fold napkins and light a candle and call everyone down. "Dinner's ready!" Claire would come to the table distracted, phone in hand, scrolling through emails or text messages or whatever invisible crisis demanded her attention more than the food I'd spent 3 hours preparing. "This looks great, Mom, thanks." She'd take 3 bites, maybe 4 if I was lucky, then excuse herself to take a call. Work emergency, client crisis, time-sensitive issue that couldn't wait. Derek would eat in silence, eyes on, the TV in the living room, visible from the kitchen, sports, usually, sometimes news. He'd shovel food into his mouth like it was fuel, not a meal someone had made with care. Emma would pick at her plate, pushing carrots around with her fork, building little mountains of mashed potatoes she had no intention of eating. "Grandma, can I have chicken nuggets instead?" "You haven't tried the pot roast yet, sweetie." "I don't like pot roast." "You liked it last month. That was different." Everything was always different, different enough to reject, not different enough to explain. After a while, I stopped making big dinners. I made simple things. Pasta with jarred sauce, grilled cheese and tomato soup, frozen chicken tenders Emma would actually eat, boxed mac and cheese that stained the pot orange no matter how hard I scrubbed. No one seemed to notice the difference. No one said, "Hey, Mum, what happened to those Sunday roasts you used to make?" No one asked if I was okay, if I was tired, if maybe I needed help instead of being the help. I did the laundry too. Claire worked long hours, and Derek was never home long enough to care about clean clothes. So I figured it was the least I could do to earn my place, to justify the space I was taking up in their guest room. I'd sort everything by colour, by fabric type, exactly the way Richard had taught me 40 years ago when we bought our first washing machine: whites with whites, darks with darks, delicates on gentle cycle. I'd fold Derek's shirts the way Richard used to like his folded smooth and crisp, collars flat, sleeves tucked just right. I'd match Emma's tiny socks, dozens of them, mismatched patterns that somehow never stayed paired. Unicorns and rainbows and cartoon characters I didn't recognize. I'd hang Claire's work blouses on wooden hangers, not wire, because wire left marks in the shoulders. I did it all without being asked, without expecting thanks. Because that's what mothers do, right? We give, we serve, we make ourselves useful so we're not a burden. One afternoon, I was folding clothes in the living room while Claire worked at the dining table, laptop open, headphones on, lost in her own world. I held up one of Emma's school uniforms, a blue polo shirt that was starting to look small, the sleeves riding up her arms when she raised her hand in class. "Claire, honey, Emma's uniform is getting small. Should we look for a new one?" She didn't respond. The only sound was the clicking of her keyboard, fast and rhythmic like rain on a tin roof. I said it again, a little louder. "Claire." Nothing. She was in her own world, the world that didn't include me. I folded the uniform, added it to the pile, and didn't bring it up again. That's when I started to notice the pattern, not all at once, but slowly, like watching the tide pull back from the shore, leaving nothing but sand and shells and the realization that the water was never really yours to begin with. I'd ask Claire about her day. She'd give one-word answers: fine, busy, stressful, long. I'd try to start a conversation with Derek. He'd nod, say, "Mm-hmm," and turn back to his phone, scrolling through something that was apparently more interesting than me. I'd ask Emma about school. She'd shrug, say, it was okay, and run off to play on her iPad, disappearing into her room where I could hear the tinny sound effects of whatever game she was playing. No one asked me anything. Not how I was feeling, not if I missed Richard, not if I was okay living in a guest room at 64 years old, sleeping in a bed that wasn't mine, in a house that didn't feel like home. I was invisible, a ghost in floral print house dresses and sensible shoes. And then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was early October. The air had that first sharp bite of fall, the kind that makes you reach for a sweater even when the sun is shining. I was in the kitchen making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. Simple, efficient, the kind of meal no one could complain about. Claire came downstairs, hair wet from the shower, already on her phone. "Morning, Mum." "Good morning, sweetheart. I made eggs. Do you want... I'll just grab a yogurt. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. She took a yogurt from the fridge, grabbed a spoon, and disappeared back upstairs without looking at me once. Derek came down next. He didn't say good morning. He poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, and stared at his phone while he drank it standing up. He left the mug on the counter half full and walked out the door. Emma was last. She shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, baby girl. Hungry?" She nodded. I plated her eggs, added toast, poured her juice. She ate 3 bites, then pushed the plate away. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat, sweetheart. You have school." She ignored me, slipped off the chair, and wandered into the living room. I stood there in that kitchen, the smell of eggs and burnt toast hanging in the air, and something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, hairline fracture that I knew would never fully heal. I looked at the stove, at the eggs I'd made that no one wanted, at the coffee mug Derek left behind, at the toast Emma abandoned, at the yogurt container Claire would leave on her desk upstairs, half eaten for me to find later. And I thought, what if I just stopped? What if I stopped trying so hard to be needed, to be useful, to be anything other than the woman in the guest room? What if I stopped talking? Would they notice? I decided to find out. The first day, I said nothing unless directly asked a question. Claire came downstairs mid-morning while I was wiping down the kitchen counters. The smell of lemon cleaner hung in the air, sharp and chemical. "Mom, have you seen my laptop charger?" "Living room," I said. 1 word. That's it. She didn't thank me, didn't say anything else, just walked away, phone pressed to her ear, already talking to someone else. Derek called from the road that afternoon. I could hear him through Claire's speakerphone in the next room, his voice tinny and distant. "Is your mom around?" I forgot to tell her the HOA meeting got moved to Thursday. "Yeah, she's here. Mom," Claire called out. "Did you hear that? HOA meeting Thursday." "Yes," I said from the kitchen where I was peeling potatoes for dinner. That was it. No follow-up, no conversation, no, "How are you holding up, Mom?" or "Do you need anything?" Just acknowledgement that I'd been addressed, that the message had been received, that I'd performed my function as information storage unit. Emma asked me to help her with her homework that evening. I sat with her at the dining table while Claire worked upstairs and nodded or pointed when she needed guidance. Math problems about fractions and percentages. Reading comprehension about a girl who trained her dog. She didn't notice I wasn't speaking. She just wanted someone there, a warm body to sit across from while she worked through problems she already knew how to solve. She didn't need my words. She needed my presence, my witness, my silent approval. Day 2 was the same. Minimal words, functional responses, 1 or 2 syllables when absolutely necessary. "Morning, Mom." "Morning." "Did you sleep okay?" "Fine." "Want some coffee?" "Sure." That was it. 8 words total before noon. No one noticed. Day 3, 4, 5, a week passed, then 2, then a month. I stopped offering commentary, stopped asking questions about their days, stopped filling the silence with the kind of small talk that used to make me feel connected, involved, like part of something. I stopped saying, "How was your day?" when Claire came downstairs. I stopped asking Derek, "How was your trip?" when he came home from the road. I stopped telling Emma, "That's wonderful, sweetie," when she showed me her artwork. I made meals when asked, cleaned when it needed doing, existed in the margins of their lives like a piece of furniture they'd grown so accustomed to, they forgot it could move. And here's what I discovered. People don't actually listen to you. They listen to the idea of you. They hear the sounds you make and assume it means the same thing it always has. Compliance, availability, submission. They hear morning and think you've said, "Good morning, darling. How did you sleep? What can I do for you?" Today, They hear fine and think you've said, everything is absolutely wonderful. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for letting me stay. They fill in the gaps themselves because they're not actually interested in what you have to say. They're interested in the role you play, the function you serve, the space you occupy. But I wasn't any of those things anymore. I was just quiet. And the quiet, I discovered, was a kind of freedom. I didn't have to perform anymore, didn't have to pretend to be interested in Claire's work drama or Derek's sales quotas or the intricate social politics of second grade that Emma would narrate in exhausting detail. I could just be silent, observant, invisible. 6 weeks into my silence, something happened that confirmed everything I'd started to suspect. It was a Saturday morning. Derek was home, which was rare. Claire had taken Emma to a birthday party. I was in the kitchen cleaning up breakfast dishes when Derek walked in, opened the fridge, stared at it like it might speak to him, then closed it again. "Margaret, where's the orange juice?" I pointed to the door shelf. He grabbed it, poured himself a glass, left the container on the counter and walked away. 5 minutes later, he came back. "Hey, did Claire say what time they'd be back?" I shook my head. He frowned. "You don't know?" I shrugged. He stared at me for a moment like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't interest him enough to actually work on. "Are you feeling okay?" I nodded. "All right then." And he left. That evening, Claire came home stressed. She'd fought with another mum at the party. Something about gluten-free cupcakes and entitlement and why can't people just be normal? She ranted to Derek while I sat in the corner of the living room with a book I wasn't reading. She acted like I was poisoning her kid. "It's a cupcake, for God's sake. People are so sensitive now." Derek made vague agreeing noises. Claire turned to me. Suddenly, "What do you think, Mum?" I looked up, met her eyes, and said nothing. She waited for a beat, then turned back to Derek. "Anyway, I just can't deal with these people." She didn't ask again, didn't press, just moved on like my silence was an answer she'd already expected. And that's when I realized my voice had never mattered. Not really. I was just background noise, ambient sound, the hum of a refrigerator they only noticed when it stopped working. But I wasn't broken. I was choosing silence, and that changed everything. Week 7. That's when I made the decision. I was sitting in the guest room one evening, the peace lily Richard gave me blooming on the dresser, white petals soft as whispers. I'd been looking at my bank account on my phone, the savings from the house sale, the emergency fund I'd tucked away. $186,000 minus the $30,000 I'd spent or set aside. $156,000 sitting there, patient, waiting. I thought about Richard, about how he used to say, "Margaret, you're tougher than you think. Don't let people underestimate you, especially not yourself." I pulled out my laptop. The old one Claire said was too slow but worked just fine for me, and I started searching. Apartments, small ones, 1 bedroom, affordable, close to a bus line. I found one within an hour. A modest little place on the east side of town, $850 a month. First and last month's rent plus security deposit. $2,550 to move in. I could afford that. Easily. I filled out the application right there, sitting on the floral comforter in the guest room of my daughter's house. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. 3 days later, I got the approval email. I didn't tell Claire, I didn't tell Derek. I just started packing. I moved out on a Thursday morning while everyone was gone. Claire at work, Derek on the road, Emma at school. I packed my 2 suitcases carefully. Clothes folded the way Richard taught me. Shoes wrapped in plastic bags so they wouldn't dirty. Anything else. My 3 boxes of personal items, photos, and books, and the few pieces of jewelry I still owned. The peace lily was the last thing I packed. I wrapped it in newspaper, secured it in a cardboard box, made sure the soil wouldn't spill. I called a cab, didn't ask Claire if I could borrow her car, didn't ask Derek if he could help me move. I just called Yellow Cab and waited on the front porch with my belongings. The driver was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a Red Sox cap. He loaded my things without asking questions, didn't comment on the small number of belongings a 64-year-old woman had accumulated in a lifetime. I left the peace lily on the kitchen counter with a note. "Thank you for letting me stay. I found my own place. I'll be fine." Mom. Short. Polite. Final. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave my new phone number. I didn't explain where I was going or why. I just left. The cab ride took 20 minutes. The driver tried to make small talk at first, asking about the weather, about the traffic, about the Red Sox's chances this season. When I didn't respond beyond polite nods, he gave up, turned on the radio to some classic rock station, and let me sit in silence. I watched the streets pass by, the familiar neighborhoods where Richard and I used to drive, the coffee shop where we'd meet Claire for breakfast when she was in college, the park where we'd taken Emma when she was learning to walk. All those memories, all those moments, and I was leaving them behind. The apartment was in a part of town I didn't know well. East Side, older buildings, trees lining the streets. The landlord, a woman named Mrs. Chen, met me at the entrance with keys and paperwork. "You're Margaret?" "Yes." "Welcome. It's a quiet building. Nice neighbours. No trouble." She showed me to apartment 2B. Second floor, no elevator, but I didn't mind the stairs. Richard always said stairs kept you young. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Cream-coloured walls, hardwood floors that creaked in places, but were solid. A window in the living room that looked out at a little courtyard with a bench and a magnolia tree. A kitchen with old appliances, but a gas stove, the kind Richard preferred. A bedroom barely big enough for a double bed and a dresser. A bathroom with pink tile from the 1970s. It was perfect. I unpacked slowly, put my clothes in the closet, arranged my photos on the dresser, set the peace lily on the kitchen windowsill where it could get morning light. I bought a second-hand sofa from a thrift store on the corner. $75, dark blue fabric, worn but clean. The shop owner's son delivered it for an extra $20 and helped me arrange it in the living room. I bought sheets and towels from Target. Nothing fancy, just functional. White, easy to bleach when they got dingy. I cooked my first meal in that apartment 3 hours after I arrived. Scrambled eggs and toast. Simple, satisfying. I ate sitting at the small kitchen table looking out at the magnolia tree, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, not happiness, not joy, just peace. The absence of anxiety, of performance, of the constant low-level hum of not being enough. Claire called 4 hours after I left. I was washing my dinner dishes when my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. My finger hovered over the red decline button, but I answered. "Mom, what the hell? You just left without telling us?" I didn't say anything, just held the phone to my ear, listening. "This is so dramatic. We gave you a place to stay and you just disappear?" Do you know how worried I was? Emma came home crying because you were gone. I stayed silent. Let her words wash over me like rain on glass. Mom, are you there? Say something. Her voice was rising, that particular pitch that meant she was getting frustrated, that particular edge that meant she expected compliance. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it ring, watched it buzz on the counter, Claire's name flashing over and over until it went to voicemail. She called again, and again I let it ring. Derek called next. I didn't answer that either. The voicemails piled up. Claire's voice getting progressively more frustrated, more demanding, more confused. Mom, this is ridiculous. Call me back. I don't understand why you're doing this. You're being childish. Fine. If you want to be alone, be alone. See how that works out for you. That last one made me smile, not a happy smile, a tired, knowing smile. Because I'd been alone for months. I'd been alone sitting at their dinner table. I'd been alone folding their laundry in their living room. I'd been alone sleeping in their guest room. The only difference now was that I'd chosen it. For 3 days, my phone buzzed constantly. Texts, calls, voicemails, all of them demanding an explanation, an apology, a response. I gave them nothing. On the 4th day, the calls stopped. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along. They were only upset because I left, not because they missed me, not because they loved me, but because I disrupted their routine. I was the laundry doer, the dinner maker, the silent presence that kept their house running smoothly while they focused on their real lives, their important lives, their lives that mattered. I wasn't a person to them. I was a service, a function, a convenience. And now the service had been discontinued, and they had no idea how to cope with that. I spent the next 3 weeks building a life that was entirely mine, not my daughter's version of what my life should be, not society's expectations for a widow in her 60s, not the careful, quiet, unobtrusive existence I'd been performing for months. My life, on my terms. I started small. I bought plants, real ones, not just the peace lily. A snake plant for the bedroom because they're nearly impossible to kill. A pothos vine for the bathroom that would trail down from the shelf above the toilet. Herbs for the kitchen windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme. Richard used to grow herbs in our backyard. He'd make me smell them, crush the leaves between his fingers, and hold them up to my nose. That's what fresh oregano smells like, Maggie. Not that dried stuff from the store. I bought them for him. For the memory of him. For the version of myself that used to cook with fresh ingredients and take pride in meals that took time. I joined a book club at the local library, Tuesday evenings at 7. 12 women, mostly my age, some older, some younger. We read fiction, memoir, occasionally poetry. We met in the community room with bad coffee and store-bought cookies and talked about books like they mattered, because they did. The first week, I barely spoke. Old habits. But the second week, when we discussed a novel about a woman who left her husband after 40 years, I raised my hand. I think she was brave, I said. Not because she left, but because she admitted she was unhappy. That takes more courage than staying. The room went quiet. Then a woman named Patricia, probably 75, white hair and bright blue eyes, nodded vigorously. Yes, exactly that. We're taught that endurance is virtue, but sometimes endurance is just fear dressed up as loyalty. After the meeting, Patricia approached me with 2 paper cups of terrible coffee. You're new. Yes. I'm Patricia. I've been coming to this book club for 12 years. You're going to love it here. We're all a little bit feral. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in so long. Patricia became my first real friend in my new life. She was a retired English teacher, widowed for 8 years, with 3 children who lived in other states and called on holidays. They love me, she said matter-of-factly one afternoon when we met for coffee. But they don't know me. Not really. They know the version of me that sent care packages and showed up to graduations. They don't know the woman who reads crime novels at 2 a.m. or tried online dating last year and went on 3 terrible dates before giving up. You tried online dating? Oh, honey, at my age, you have to stay open to possibilities. The dates were disasters, but the stories are excellent. She made me laugh. She made me feel seen. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. I took a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings at the community center. The instructor was a soft-spoken man named James who wore paint-stained jeans and spoke about color theory like it was poetry. Water and pigment have their own relationship, he said during the first class. Your job isn't to control it. Your job is to guide it, to suggest where it might go, but ultimately you have to let it be what it wants to be. I wasn't good at watercolor. My trees looked like green blobs. My skies ran into my landscapes in muddy browns, but I loved it. Loved the feel of the brush in my hand. Loved watching the colors spread across the paper in ways I couldn't predict. Richard used to say I needed to learn to let go of control. Not everything has to be perfect, Maggie. Sometimes good enough is fine. I was learning that lesson 40 years too late, but I was learning it. I cooked meals just for myself. Small portions, things I liked. Not what Richard preferred or what Claire's family would eat or what would be easy to stretch into leftovers. Salmon with dill and lemon, roasted vegetables with olive oil and sea salt, lemon pasta with capers and fresh parsley from my windowsill garden. I ate at my small kitchen table with a cloth napkin, not paper. I poured myself a glass of wine sometimes, white and cold, the kind Richard said was too sweet, but I'd always secretly preferred. I set the table for one, and I didn't apologize for it. I talked to my neighbors. Howard, in 2A, an elderly man who'd lost his wife 2 years ago and spent his days doing crossword puzzles in the courtyard. We'd nod to each other in the morning, exchange comments about the weather, the magnolia tree, the noise from the street. You settling in okay? He asked one morning. Yes, better than okay. Good, good. My Phyllis used to say change is hard, but staying stuck is harder. Took me a while to understand what she meant. I think I'm starting to understand it now. He nodded, went back to his crossword. The young couple in 3A had a newborn. I'd hear him crying at odd hours, that particular desperate wail that meant tired or hungry or just overwhelmed by existing. The mother, Sarah, always looked exhausted but smiled when she saw me. Sorry if Oliver keeps you up. Oh, honey, don't apologize. Babies cry. That's their job. I just feel like we're disturbing everyone. You're not disturbing me. I raised a baby alone. I know what it's like. If you ever need anything, I'm right. Downstairs. She looked like she might cry. Thank you. That's really kind. Diane in 1C worked nights as a nurse and loved true crime podcasts. We'd sometimes cross paths on the stairs, her heading to work as I was coming home from book club or watercolor class. Have you listened to the new season of Criminal? She asked one evening. I haven't. I don't really listen to podcasts. Oh, you should. I'll write down some recommendations for you. She did. Slipped a note under my door the next day with 5 podcast titles and brief descriptions. These are the good ones, the ones that treat victims like people, not props. These people, these strangers, they knew me as Margaret, just Margaret, not Claire's mother, not Richard's widow, not the woman who used to live in a 4-bedroom house with a mortgage and a garden, just Margaret, a woman who lived in 2B, who bought groceries on Wednesdays, who said good morning and meant it. And for the first time in years, I felt like a whole person, not a role, not a function, a person. Claire showed up on week 4. I was sitting on the bench in the courtyard, reading a library book about a woman who hiked the Appalachian Trail alone at 70 when I heard her voice. Mom. I looked up. She was standing at the edge of the courtyard in her work clothes, blazer and slacks, hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face a mix of frustration and something I couldn't quite read. Maybe guilt, maybe just annoyance. We need to talk. I closed my book slowly, carefully marked my place with the receipt I'd been using as a bookmark. Said nothing. She sat down beside me, uninvited, her body language tight and defensive. This is ridiculous. You've been ignoring us for weeks. Emma keeps asking where you are. She cries at night. She made you a drawing and you haven't even seen it. Derek thinks you've lost it. And honestly, so do I. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The daughter I'd raised, the girl I'd stayed up with when she had nightmares about monsters under her bed. The teenager I'd driven to volleyball practice 3 times a week. The woman I'd helped move into her first apartment, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs because she couldn't afford movers. And I saw a stranger. Someone who looked like my daughter, but didn't sound like her, didn't act like her. Or maybe this was who she'd always been, and I'd just been too busy performing the role of devoted mother to notice. You can't just shut us out like this, she continued, her voice rising slightly. It's childish. We're your family. You lived with us. We took care of you. Took care of me, as if I'd been a burden they'd shouldered out of obligation. I opened my mouth. The words came slow, deliberate. The first full sentences I'd spoken to her in almost 3 months. When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? She blinked. What? When was the last time you asked me if I was okay? If I was sad? If I missed your father? Mom, I lived in your house for 3 months, Claire. 3 months. I cooked. I cleaned. I helped with Emma. I folded your husband's underwear and matched your daughter's socks and made dinners that no one ate. And not once, not one single time, did you ask me how I was feeling. Her face flushed red. That's not fair. We were giving you a place to stay, a roof over your head. We didn't have to do that. You're right. You didn't have to. And I'm grateful that you offered. But you didn't give me a home, Claire. You gave me a room with conditions, unspoken, but conditions all the same. Be useful. Be quiet. Don't take up too much space. Don't need too much attention. Don't remind us that you're a person with feelings and needs and a grief so big it feels like it's crushing your chest every single morning. I never said any of that. You didn't have to. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something crack in her facade, something vulnerable, scared, young. I was trying my best, she said quietly. I know you were, but your best wasn't what I needed. Then what did you need? Tell me. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to see me, I said simply. To notice me. To care that I was there for reasons other than what I could do for you. She looked away, stared at the magnolia tree with its white blooms just starting to open. I went 6 weeks without saying more than 1 or 2 words at a time, I continued. And you didn't notice. Emma didn't notice. Derek certainly didn't notice because you weren't listening. You never were. You were just waiting for me to perform my function, to serve my purpose, to be the grandmother and the maid and the emotional support animal all rolled into one convenient package. That's not fair. When's my birthday, Claire? She hesitated, just for a second too long. June. July 16th. I'll be 65 this year. When did your father die? Mom, I know when Dad... April 9th, 18 months ago. You called me twice in the first month after he died. Twice. Both times for less than 5 minutes. You asked if I was okay. I said yes, because that's what you wanted to hear, what you needed to hear so you could hang up and go back to your life. You never asked again. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The words had been building for 3 months, for 18 months, maybe for years. I'm not angry, sweetheart. I'm really not. I'm just done. I'm done being invisible. I'm done waiting for you to see me. I'm done performing the role of the grateful mother who's just happy to be included. I stood up, picked up our book. You can visit if you want, but only if you actually want to. Not because you feel obligated, not because Emma asks, not because you need someone to watch her while you work, only if you want to know who I am now, not who I used to be, not who you need me to be, who I actually am. I walked back toward the building, my feet steady, my heart pounding but clear. She called after me, Mom, wait. I stopped, turned around. Where do you even live? What's your apartment number? 2B. You're welcome to visit. When you're ready to listen. I walked inside, climbed the stairs to the second floor, let myself into my small, perfect apartment. She didn't knock. She didn't follow. And I was okay with that because for the first time in my adult life, I'd set a boundary. I'd said no. I demanded to be seen as something other than a convenience. And it felt terrifying and liberating and right. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the peace lily blooming on the kitchen counter, white petals soft as tissue paper. And I thought about Richard, about the night before he died, when we'd sat on the back porch of our house watching fireflies blink in the darkness. You know what I love about you, Maggie? He'd said. What? You never give up. On anything. On anyone. Even when you should. I'd laughed. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. You're loyal to a fault. It's beautiful and it's dangerous. Dangerous how? Because some people will take and never give back. And you'll let them because you think that's what love looks like. I dismissed it at the time, thought he was being philosophical, overly dramatic, but he'd been warning me, trying to tell me something he knew I wasn't ready to hear, that not everyone deserves your loyalty, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. I'm sorry. Can we try again? I stared at it for a long time, watched the cursor blink, felt the familiar pull, the old instinct to fix things, to smooth them over, to make everyone comfortable even when I was the one hurting. But I didn't respond right away. Instead, I got up, made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the lights come on in the neighboring apartments. People living their lives, cooking dinner, watching TV, putting children to bed. Normal, ordinary, beautiful lives that didn't require my participation or approval. After an hour, I picked up my phone and typed back, "When you're ready to listen, I'll be here." And I meant it, because I wasn't going to beg for her attention anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into the margins of her life. I wasn't going to apologize for taking up space or needing things or being a whole person with feelings and boundaries. I was going to live fully, quietly, unapologetically. And if she wanted to be part of that, she was welcome. But it would be on my terms, not hers. 3 months. Later, on a Saturday afternoon in early summer, there was a soft knock on my door. I was in the middle of painting, watercolors spread across my kitchen table, trying to capture the way light filtered through the magnolia leaves in the courtyard. I set down my brush, wiped my hands on a towel, and opened the door. Claire stood there with Emma, who was holding a drawing she'd made. A picture of the two of us, stick figures with crayon smiles, standing under a tree that looked suspiciously like the magnolia. "Grandma, I missed you," Emma said, her voice small and earnest. I knelt down, pulled her into a hug, felt her small arms wrap around my neck, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift. Just a little, just enough. "I missed you too, sweetheart." Claire stood in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her, looking uncertain, nervous, young. "Can we come in?" "Of course." They sat on my secondhand sofa. Emma immediately started telling me about school, about her new teacher, about the book she was reading, about her best friend Sophie who'd moved away over the summer. Claire and I didn't fix everything that day. We didn't have a tearful reconciliation or a movie moment apology. But we sat there in my small apartment that smelled like paint and tea and fresh herbs, and we talked. Really talked. She told me she'd been overwhelmed. That work had been crushing her, that Derek was never home, that she felt like she was drowning and couldn't ask for help because she was supposed to have everything together. "I took you for granted," she said quietly. "I thought you'd always be there. I thought you needed us more than we needed you. I was wrong." "You were doing your best," I said. "I know that. But your best wasn't what I needed." "I know, I'm learning that now." She told me she'd started therapy, that her therapist had asked her when she'd last had a real conversation with me, and she couldn't remember, that she'd realized she'd been treating me like staff, not family. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, for not seeing you, for not listening, for letting Derek set the tone in our house, for making you feel like you didn't matter." "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. "Things are going to be different now," I told her. "I'm not moving back in. I'm not going to be available whenever you need childcare or laundry done or meals cooked. I love you. I love Emma. But I have my own life now, my own friends, my own routines. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to really understand. I'm not the same woman who moved into your guest room. I'm someone new now. Someone who knows her worth. Someone who won't disappear for the convenience of others." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I see that, and I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, to have your own life." Emma was coloring at the kitchen table, humming to herself, oblivious to the adult conversation happening around her. "Can we visit?" Claire asked. "Like this?" Not because we need something, just because we want to. Yes, but you have to call first and you have to listen when I talk. Really listen, not just wait for your turn to speak. I promise. I didn't know if she'd keep that promise. People say a lot of things in moments of guilt and clarity. Whether they follow through is another matter entirely. But it was a start. I'm 65 now. I've been in my apartment for almost a year. I see Claire and Emma once a week, usually for lunch at a little cafe near the library or for a walk around the park. Derek and I are cordial, polite, nothing more. He's background noise in my relationship with my daughter. I've made real friends. Patricia and I have coffee every Tuesday before book club. Howard and I do crossword puzzles in the courtyard on Sunday mornings. Diane and I exchange podcast recommendations and sometimes watch true crime documentaries together on her nights off. I still take watercolor classes. My trees still look like blobs sometimes, but I've gotten better at skis. James says I have a good eye for color, which makes me stupidly happy every time he says it. I still think about Richard every day, about the life we had, the life I thought I'd have, the future we'd planned that disappeared in 23 minutes on a kitchen floor. But I'm not living in the past anymore. I'm not waiting for my real life to start, for someone to give me permission to matter, to exist, to take up space. I'm here, present, visible, finally, and I'm talking again. Not because I have to, not because someone needs me to fill the silence, not because my worth is measured by how useful I am or how little trouble I cause, but because I finally have something worth saying and people are listening, not because they need something from me, but because they actually want to hear me. They're curious about my thoughts, my opinions, my experiences. Patricia asks me what I think about books and politics and whether I believe in second chances. Howard asks about Richard, about our marriage, about how I survived the first year of widowhood. James asks what I see when I look at a blank piece of paper before I start painting. They ask because they care, because I'm not a function to them. I'm Margaret, just Margaret, and that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Last week, Emma asked me a question while we were at the park. Grandma, why did you leave our house? Claire tensed, ready to intervene, to change the subject, but I held up a hand. Because I forgot who I was, I told Emma honestly. I was so busy trying to be helpful that I forgot to be myself, and I needed to remember. Did you remember? I'm still remembering every day. Are you happy now? I thought about it, really thought about it. Happiness is such a complicated word. It's not constant. It's not a destination. It's not something you achieve and then keep forever. But I was content. I was at peace. I was living a life that felt like mine. Yes, I said, I'm happy now. Emma nodded, satisfied, and ran off to the swings. Claire sat beside me on the bench. Thank you for being honest with her. She deserves honesty. So do you. I know I've said this before, but I really am sorry for everything. I know you are. Are we okay, you and me? I looked at her, my daughter, the person I'd created and raised and loved more than anything in the world. The person who'd hurt me more deeply than anyone else could have because I'd given her that power. We're getting there, I said. Some days are better than others, but we're trying, and that counts for something. She took my hand, squeezed it gently. We sat there in silence, but it wasn't the silence of my 6 weeks of not talking. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, of being invisible, of being taken for granted. It was the silence of two people who were learning how to be in each other's lives again, differently, honestly, with boundaries and respect and actual love, not just obligation dressed up as love. It was a good silence, the kind of silence that comes after you've finally said everything you needed to say. No one noticed when I stopped talking, but everyone noticed when I left. And that taught me the most important lesson of my life. Your silence can be louder than your voice if you use it right. I stopped talking to see if I mattered. And when no one noticed, I realized the truth. I didn't need them to tell me I mattered. I just needed to start believing it myself. Some people think power comes from being loud, from making demands, from forcing people to pay attention. But I learned that real power comes from knowing when to stop giving, when to stop performing, when to stop waiting for permission to be a whole person. Real power comes from walking away from people who don't see you and building a life with people who do. It comes from setting boundaries and keeping them, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when people you love call you selfish or dramatic or difficult. It comes from saying, I matter, my needs matter, my voice matters, and meaning it. I'm 65 years old. I live in a small apartment with a peace lily on the windowsill and watercolor paintings drying on the kitchen table. I have friends who ask me real questions and wait for real answers. I have a daughter who's learning how to see me again. I have a granddaughter who draws pictures of us together. And I have myself, the woman I'd lost somewhere between being Richard's wife and Claire's mother. The woman who liked sweet white wine and herb gardens and books about women who did brave things. The woman who could sit in silence and be comfortable with it because it was her silence, chosen and powerful and true. I found her again, and I'm never letting her go. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Your voice matters, even when they tell you it doesn't, especially when they tell you it doesn't. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop talking, and then when you're ready, start again. But this time, on your own terms.